Hey, it's Nootsie, and today we're going to talk about the best uses of intermittent fasting, and we're really going to focus on the sweet spot of all of the different research and data that I could get my hands on, and I'm going to share with you what I found really lines up with the data and what I have tried. But, I'm going to try to tell you the things that I've looked at where I kept seeing the same information over and over and over again, or at least where they agreed, because there is mountains of information out there. And so your job will be to figure out which one you want to try, or maybe you are already intermittent fasting and you want to incorporate some of these cliff notes that I'm going to give you. But intermittent fasting, you may have heard it called time restricted eating. The one I like the most is the eating window. Sounds a little more positive to me. But there are things like the 5-2 where you eat, intermittent fastedly for 5 days and you're off for 2. There's OMAD where you eat 1 meal a day. It's called OMAD to GOMAD sometimes. Or also there are ones where you eat alternate days, where you eat one day and then you fast the next day, or just calorie restrict. But it basically involves just switching from a fed state to a fasted state on a regular basis. And personally, I've been adjusting my eating window over the last couple years and pretty much tried a lot of them. And so I'm going to share with you what I have found and how it lines up with the research that I've been able to get my hands on. But we're going to focus on the Cliff Notes version, how to do it, the tips and tricks that you can incorporate this into your life easily for the maximum benefits, and also how to add it as a spiritual practice. So in our current culture, we are eating all day long. We're eating from when we get up to when we go to bed. And they're finding that it really has negative consequences on our health, in contrast to what I used to teach, 20 years ago, and what the modern thought of that day is where if you have slow metabolism, you want to eat all day long because that stimulates your metabolism. But what they're finding is when we're eating all day long, and especially when we're eating larger meals, it takes much longer to break that food down and digest it. And it's really more taxing on the body. So when we do eat, it does aim the body towards a biological and chemical state of cell growth. That sounds good, right? But what happens if we never get to an unfed state, or we don't cease from eating, then we can't head our body or our biology towards the chemical state of cell repair. And unfortunately, that's the way most of us are eating now. And so what happens when we're eating all day long and we never get to the unfed state or the fasted state, we have a dramatic increase in our blood sugar level and our insulin level. And so, especially if we're eating carbohydrates, anything with the OSE at the end of it, like fructose from fruit, or sucrose, or glucose, or lactose, any of those OSE foods, if they're high in carbohydrates, then what happens is they're finding that leads to obesity, it leads to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and it lowers our life expectancy. And so if we can incorporate intermittent fasting, it actually encourages lean body mass and fat loss. But it really does increase brown fat, and it helps white fat turn into beige fat. And so the difference between white fat and brown fat is white fat is basically like a little storage unit for excess, and brown fat gets its color because it's packed full of mitochondria, and mitochondria has a lot of iron in it, so that's where it gets its brown color from. But babies are born with a lot of brown fat because they can't shiver until they're a little bit older, and so that brown fat then keeps them warm. And brown fat's duty is like a little engine that heats up to keep us warm. And that's one of the reasons why the cold therapy is getting so much play, because it increases the mitochondria in the body, which makes us look younger and makes us more of a fat burning machine. But When we intermittent fast, or when we incorporate, being in an unfed state in our lifestyle, it increases metabolism because it gives the body that chance to do the cellular repair and break down what we've eaten and bring the nutrients to our cells. So this cellular growth stage normally happens when we are asleep, but it's greatly hindered if we're eating right up until the time we go to bed. And so what we're going to look at is how to get into the unfed state during intermittent fasting. And so when you're asleep, yes, there is cellular repair, but also if you can do intermittent fasting correctly, it also happens during that state. And you can imagine it's like little Pac-Men on the inside of our body that are gobbling up debris from metabolism, which is dead cells, injured cells, diseased cells. But also during this time, it's when the healthy cells are at a spa day, if you will. It's when they're under repair and restoration. But also during this time, the lymphatic system does its magic. And most of the time when we hear about lymph nodes, it's like, oh, my lymph nodes are swollen. Or when somebody has a surgery related to cancer, they take out lymph nodes. But lymphatic circulation runs parallel to the blood vessel system. And it's the movement of the lymph fluid and other fluid through the brain and body. It's like the rinse cycle of the body when we are removing the metabolic debris. But when we eat food, it gives the body the nutrients, but we also have to give the body the time to bring those nutrients to the cells and dispose of the waste. And the big thing that happens when we are in an unfed state, it enhances brain function and clarity, and it offsets dementia. And I don't know if you've ever experienced someone close to you having dementia, but it's horrible. And this is a really easy way to offset or inhibit or stop from having dementia. But you have to get to being in the unfed or the fasted state. And when you do that, what's really exciting is the body turns on the genes that signal restoration, repair, clear out debris, but it also lowers inflammatory cytokines. And inflammation is really a big deal. And it's one, it's a battle that I've had to fight at various times during my life, but you can really keep it under control or at bay by adding an eating window or ceasing from, eating all the way from, when we go to bed at night, and then we start the minute we get up in the morning. So you want to think about any time we eat a large meal or we put a lot of food into our system, we increase our sleepiness, because what happens is all that blood gets diverted to the gut and it starts to digest until completion. So remember when they would say, don't go swimming until you've waited a little bit, because once the digestion process starts, it continues until there is completion. Because what happens is when we're eating all day, we're eating large meals, it triggers the vagus nerve to shut down some of the energy that is going to the brain to utilize that energy and the nutrients for digestion. So resting from digestion then can be said to give the body the opportunity to use the energy being utilized for digestion and use it for R&R, which is in this case restoration and repair. Just a reminder that we really are a biological experiment of one. So what works for one person is not necessarily always going to work for another person. But across the board, these are things that, every school of thought has at least agreed on or been very similar. And so what they found is when is as important as how. And what I mean by that is they found by getting outside or exposing yourself to daylight as early as possible kind of anchors in our circadian rhythm, or the rhythm that we have, or our body clock, so to speak. And so when you get out early and you start to see sunlight early, it kind of sets the body clock on a good rhythm. And then if you have trouble sleeping, or even if you're just trying to regulate your circadian clock, is to watch the sun going down. But as far as intermittent fasting, is they found if you can get outside, expose yourself to sunlight, that is really helpful, because 80% of our genes of our body and our brain are on a 24-hour cycle. So we want our genes to be expressed at the peak time. And by exposing ourselves to sunlight early, it really does help all of those processes. It also helps regulate body temperature. And so sunlight early and watching the sun go down is really important for the circadian rhythm and helping anchor ourselves into our intermittent fasting. And then as far as the window goes, they found that the sweet spot is the 7 to 8 hour eating window, which means we are not eating 16 to 17 hours. And if you're thinking, no way, Jose, I can't do that. I'm eating when I get up and I eat until I go to bed. What they found is very helpful is no matter what your eating window is now, just start decreasing it 1 hour a week. So if you're, eating 12 hours a day, this week, move it back to 11 hours, and then, just move it back 1 hour a day, and it really is helpful and it's more manageable. But it also is a really great embodiment tool, because you'll see how cranky and hangry the body gets when you don't give it food all day long. But what they found is the eating window less than 6 hours causes people to eat too much. And we talked about the more we eat, the harder it is for the body to digest. And it really does cause all kinds of problems with our blood sugar and our insulin level. And I found when I was doing like the 4 hour eating window, or even tried 1 meal a day, OMAD to GOMAD, I would be so hungry by the time I got home that I would overeat, and then I would be so sleepy I would have to take a nap. And so it would cause people to cheat, and then it would cause them to be really sleepy and not be able to stay consistent. And consistency was another really big thing that they found. I tried the 5 days on and the 2 days off, and it really didn't work for me. And the research and the data really corroborated what I found when I tried to do it. And so what they found is that when you do the 5 days on and the 2 days off, you're really making your body feel like you're going into different time zones, and we all know that can make us feel really jet laggy. And so we don't want to be tyrannical about it, but you want to find, times for your eating window that really work. Especially if you like to go out to dinner like I do with my hubs on the weekend. So I try to do a 6 hour eating window during the week, and then I might add an hour or two on the weekends, which really doesn't seem to matter so much. So if you want to do 12 to 7 or 12 to 8 on the weekends, just kind of start playing with the window to see what works and what is manageable for you on a social level and a familial level, because you don't want to be a tyrant about it where you're the no fun zone where nobody wants to eat with you or they don't want to go out to dinner with you. Another thing that most researchers could agree on was, one, you want to not eat anything at least for an hour after you wake up. So if your eating window is in the morning, you want to wait at least 1 hour. And then the other thing that everybody agreed on is to stop eating at least, or optimally 3 hours before going to bed. And if you can't do that, no more than 2. So that means that when we get up in the morning, the only things that we can ingest are things like black coffee, black tea, water, but no food or liquid calories for at least an hour when you get up, and then stop 3 hours if possible, but mainly, or if you can't do that, 2 hours before going to bed. And, the consideration is that, when we're sleeping, we are in a fasted state. Well, hopefully we're not getting up in the middle of the night and eating. So we can use that fasted time of sleeping to our benefit by tacking on some in the morning, and then also begin to taper as the night goes on in preparation for going to bed, because we really want to be in our unfed state or our fasted state to get the max benefit of those little Pac-Man gobbling up metabolic debris and diseased and injured and damaged cells. But we also want to give the body the opportunity to give the spa day to our cells for the repairing and the restoration. And so, if your eating window, let's just say, is from 11 to 7, you don't want to eat your last big meal at 6:59, because by the time you go to bed, you're not going to be in your fasted or your unfed state. So that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to aim our body to the biological, chemical state of being able to rest and repair and do all the things that the lymphatic circulation needs to do. So you don't want to eat really late. You don't want to have your last bite right before your fasting window ends. You want to kind of taper off. Now, I know your body might get a little hangry. It might be bratty. It might stomp its foot. But this is a great tool for embodiment. And we're going to talk about the spiritual practice of it also. But, you think about it, in the 1960s and even 50s, the plate size were 8 inches. Now people have 12-inch and 14-inch plates that we're filling. And so we can biggie size every time we go through a drive-through. They have dollar menus. So our whole culture is set up for us to be stuffed and sickly, and and to be full and satiated and not clear-headed. So it's really so much better for the body to be a little bit hungry when we go to bed, so we can get the max benefit of what the body really likes to do. It likes to ingest food, but it also likes to do the rest and digest. And so what do we do when we do overeat? It's going to happen. Or what do we do when we do eat too late? What they found, the number one thing, is to go for a brisk walk for 20 to 30 minutes, because that accelerates the rate in which we digest our food. But more importantly, it clears the OSEs, the glucose, the fructose, the sucrose, the lactose, out of our system. And so you can also do things like the HIIT training, which is high intensity interval training. But also I've done a lot of videos of the nitric oxide workout that will also help. But it's really best to go on a brisk walk 20 to 30 minutes at the end of your day. And even if you haven't overeaten, it's really valuable to begin to do those walks at night, because it's really going to help accelerate that food working through the body. It's going to help get the glucose out, but it's also going to help you build an awareness of how much you've eaten and what it feels like to be in an unfed state. And what they've also found is that when people are incorporating intermittent fasting, that they cheat. And so if you're aiming for, you're thinking a 10-hour window is the best you can do, well, aim for a 9-hour window, because it's really easy to take a bite of this or have a half a glass of wine here. And so by aiming for a shorter window, then you kind of give yourself a little bit of a buffer. But what about for those people who want to build and maintain lean muscle tissue or put on mass? Because when you think of intermittent fasting, you think that it's really counterintuitive to building muscle mass, or at least maintaining lean muscle mass. Well, it's not true. It actually causes an increase in lean muscle mass, but it also enables the body to build muscle mass, and especially if you eat protein earlier in your window. Now, it doesn't matter when you train your muscles, but it does matter is is if you eat protein earlier in your window, it really does help you build muscle mass, and it helps you maintain lean muscle mass if you do it within the first part of that eating window, if that makes sense. But what you want to do then is when you are in your non-eating window, you can have things like coffee, tea, or you can even add MCT oil or ghee, or even goat milk is really good. Those things don't knock you out of your intermittent fasting. And you can also add things like stevia and things that you can do that will actually speed up the clearing out of glucose during your non-eating window, is like doing a pinch of iodized sea salt first thing in the morning in your water will help really clear out some of that glucose that's still in the system. And you can also add cinnamon. And when it's your non-eating window, you can also add a tablespoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice into your water. That's going to be very beneficial. Let's quickly recap before we move on to my favorite part. So we said, number one, we want to expose ourselves to sunlight as early in the day as possible. And if you can, to watch the sun go down as well, because that anchors in our circadian rhythm, and then our genes are expressed at the peak time. And we just get the benefits if we can eat during the daylight hours. And then secondly, we talked about the sweet spot for the window is 7 to 8 hours, and we are going to stop eating 16 to 17 hours. And if that sounds insurmountable, just start where you are, and then each week move that window back an hour, and that makes it much more manageable. And we want to keep it consistent, because if we just do it 5 days a week like I was trying to do, and then we eat whatever we want on the weekend, or we're eating every other day and we're limiting our calories one day and eating a lot the next day, what happens is we get into kind of a jet lag cycle, like we're traveling across time zones. It's much better and much easier to maintain and keep it in our life when we do it consistently over 7 days. And so, as I mentioned, I've learned for me that it works best to do a 6-hour eating window, Monday through Thursday, and then I do a 7 to 8 hour eating window. And it doesn't seem to matter too much as far as research is concerned and what I have found. And then you're not living in the no fun zone, and you're not such a tyrant like, no, I can't go out to eat to dinner unless it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and nobody wants that, and we want to be fun, right? And then the next thing we found is that research suggests or strongly recommends that we wait at least 1 hour if you're doing your eating hour or your eating window in the morning. Don't eat for the first hour when you get up, or if it's later in the day, that we want to stop optimally 3 hours before we go to bed. But if you can't do that, at least 2, and we want to begin to taper off so we're not eating our last big meal at the 59th minute of our last window. But what do we do if we've overeaten? That brisk walk for 20 to 30 minutes really helps clear out the glucose of our system. It accelerates our digestion, but it's also really good to do even if you haven't overeaten as a tool for embodiment, because it really helps us see or feel what it is like to be in an unfed state. And then we also said that we can eat we can drink water, coffee, black tea, black coffee with MCT, ghee, goat butter, stevia. And then if we want to help our system clear out glucose, we can do things like add just a pinch of iodized sea salt in our water in the morning, or put a little cinnamon in our black tea or coffee, and then even 1 tablespoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice and water is really beneficial. But on to my favorite part, which is using intermittent fasting as a spiritual practice. And anytime that philosophies and religion and ancient teachings and science all line up and agree on any one topic, it's probably something that we should pay attention to. And whether you look at the Islam, or you look at Hinduism, or you look at Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, philosophies, science, they're all saying that it's really beneficial to fast. And intermittent fasting is really a phenomenal way to add this as a spiritual practice of embodiment, or just a spiritual practice on its own. And I'm the most familiar with Christianity, so I'm going to read a scripture out of Isaiah, or I'm going to give you the highlights, but also all the other ancient traditions say something very similar. But it says that when we fast, it unties the yoke, it allows us to go free, it tears off anything that binds or tears us down. Then our light will break forth as the dawn, our healing will spring forth speedily, and we will be guided and protected. And so when you study that word yoke in the Hebrew, it means like a staked animal. And we are anchored in our physiology, as we've learned, to this 24-hour cycle. But we can free ourselves spiritually if we practice intermittent fasting, or we cease from eating for 16 to 18 hours. And we learned it, when we do that, we go free on a cell level. Our cells get to go to the spa, but then also on a spiritual level, we untether ourselves from our biology, which is stuck in that 24-hour cycle. And then it says it tears off anything that binds or hinders us or tears us down. And we know it does from debris the body, and the body's able to destroy those diseased, injured, damaged cells, but it's also able to rest and repair and send our cells to the spa. But it also helps us on a spiritual level tune into the synchronicities that the One, the Divine, the Almighty would like to bring our way. But if we are just burdened down at all times with food, we can't hear it, because our blood is away from our brain, away from our spirit, and it's dealing with the onslaught of the calories that we've been stuffing in our pie hole. And then we can also tune in to the beauty of the things that are all around us. And it says that our light will break forth. And if you study that word in the Hebrew, it means the light of instruction, the inner light of instruction. And then you will have light upon your face, or light upon your countenance. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to have a lighted countenance? I know I do. And then it says that your light will burst forth, or it will hatch. And a friend of mine let me see one of her baby chicks being hatched, and it like popped up out of its egg, and it had its little top of the egg on its head for a little bitty bit. So it means that we're going to hatch forth. We're going to be in the light. We're going to have light like the dawning of the day, and the sunset, and the sunlight, and the sun coming up is one of the most beautiful things that we can see. And then it says that our healing will spring forth speedily. And that healing is the restoration, but it's going to cause us to sprout up. And when a seed sprouts, it increases its nutrients by 100%. And so we're like that. Well, our healing is going to spring forth or sprout forth speedily. And then it goes on to say, you will hear, and you will be like a well-watered garden whose spring never fails, and it will cause you to ride on the high places. So what happens then when we stop eating all of the time, and we get in that unfed state, or that fasted state, we can hear, we have inner hearing, or inner insight, because we're not burdened down with eating all the time. And our physiology isn't staked like that staked animal into the biological cycle and we can ride on the high places. So I hope you're like me, you're encouraged about intermittent fasting and just reining in our physiology a little bit so we can take full advantage of being in an unfed state on a biological level, but also a spiritual made up a new word, or a spiritual level. So I hope you're going to try it. I would love to hear your comments. But until next time, I hope you're going to work on getting in an unfed, fasted, intermittent fasted state so you can get the max benefits. So until next time, be blessed.